So I'm going to be talking today about how I'm using KBI in my social studies classroom. And I'm very lucky. I teach at Grey Academy in Winnipeg, and I get to teach from grade 7 to 12 in social studies. So that's everything from civics to geography to history. So it's a real smorgasbord that I can use in terms of fitting KBI with it and finding ways to really make some cross-curricular approaches. But I also teach the ELA as well. So there's that in there. And I wanted to include this picture of the spring because to me, this is like the reminder that I need, that my experiences in the last year have been very different and very much shaped by the realities of COVID. And that even when we were given the instructions, we couldn't be within 2 meters of our kids last spring. We were still trying to find ways to connect and trying to find ways to kind of still be there with our, this is, I think, a holiday treat drop off that we could only use lacrosse sticks for. But these are kind of the evolutions. And one of the things that I have found moving into this kind of year is that more and more KBI has really kind of shone for me as something that I can really rely on to get the kids interested and activated and really involved into a topic. So generally the way that I use KBI is that early on in the year, I have one class that they can just kind of look around the site. And I usually just kind of make like a test class account that they can kind of go in and try it out so they can get confident and know how to navigate it, because you don't want that to ever be the thing that stops them. And I usually am now using the videos to kind of introduce the ideas before they go into the quiz, because they generally aren't watching them in my class. If there's a video in the lesson, they're usually really good videos. And so I want to kind of have a chance to highlight it and talk and kind of digest it and then go into the lesson. And so what I'm noticing is that my kids get really focused on the vaccination part. They love the idea that they get to have active citizenship, in grade 7, in grade 8, in grade 9. And I think for us as adults, we don't necessarily think too often about how often we get to really have an impact on someone's life in the way that like a vaccine could. And so to have these kids who are doing something that's really going to help people around the world, and they know the power, God knows this year they know the power of vaccines. And so to have them be able to kind of have that agency is amazing. But I need to slow them down because they're so focused on get that quiz, get that vaccine. And I'm also focusing on get that information. So I use a lot of worksheets, usually with divergent questions, really kind of shaping how would you feel? What does this look like? How can we connect this to the historical context? And really kind of giving them the full picture. I feel like the lessons do a great job of really kind of lasering in on these topics. And then I kind of use the divergent questions to kind of to kind of span out a little bit and kind of say, okay, let's put this into the greater context. And I really like the fact that the quiz is difficult. It's not one of those things that if you didn't read the article, you could just kind of wing your way through. I think KBI really kind of says to the kids, like, this is going to be challenging. This information is really, really, high level, good quality information. But as long as you read it, you're going to do great. And as soon as the kids realize that, they usually do like one quiz and they realize like, wait a minute. And so they have to go back in and then, kind of realize, okay, I have to read this deeply. I should take my time with it. And so I think that really helps them too. And we also have been using KBI as a way to have, a positive impact, but we've also used it as a springboard to look into topics that they just kind of learned about through KBI. So for example, when we were doing the Black History Month, the kids were absolutely in awe that today at the University of Hawaii, there still are buildings and campuses named after someone who stole intellectual property, who took credit for someone else's work. And so they actually wrote emails to the dean and to the campus to kind of say, like, have you thought about renaming it? Have you thought about who you have named your campus after? And that's what I'm finding with the KBI is that they really kind of spark something in the kids, because remember at that point, not only have they learned the information, but they've also been empowered in the sense that they know that they can have an impact and they can really have a positive effect in the world around them. And so I noticed that more than any other activity, I'm going to see with my KBI activities, the kids are going to want to take it further and maybe, send an email to so-and-so or ask for a speaker about this. And it really has been a gift for my class. One of the things I like to do this year is that we've had to have team relays, because we used to kind of work in in teams, especially for some of the younger kids, or if I have kids with, differentiated needs or different language acquisition levels, then I would kind of have them work in teams. But I'm noticing even when they're individual, in a social studies classroom, we're kind of trying to teach, collaboration and, the idea of the whole and the citizen. And they will kind of look at each other and say, like, I am so stuck on this one. I keep on getting it wrong. And they'll kind of come over and say, okay, so this is what blah, 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 blah. And even if they're competing, they'll still help each other out. And I think that's absolutely amazing. In my classroom, we use BBC 1 Minute News all the time. It's the top 3 news stories, and they're about 20 seconds each, and you get a real snippet as to what is happening. And some of them are really tough. Some of them are tough for the kids to hear. And because we see it all the time, we kind of see how the stories evolve. And so to give the kids the vocabulary through KBI of what they're seeing, and also, again, sometimes afterwards to kind of go back in and kind of say, okay, we're kind of shaken by this news story. Let's have a positive impact on the world. One of the things that we do now when the kids earn a vaccine, instead of being like number 1, 2, 3 vaccines, we'll say, like, what vaccine do you think you earned? Or like, where do you think the world is going? Like, who do you think right now needs a vaccine? And so they'll kind of be able to imagine the person behind their impact. And I think that's really important too, that we humanize. I think that's the power of it. I've noticed as well the vocabulary building. There's a really great focus on that. I'm blown away with the new global effort World Immunization Day, especially for the grade 7. That's where I noticed the new activities were. But I'm really excited about the idea that it's going to be so accessible to any level of language. And the other thing that I'm really noticing is that I can get my kids to think very, very critically and really kind of look at really complex issues and things that maybe seemed, cut and dry before. And you kind of say, okay, well, why is there vaccine hesitancy, and what kind of education programs what does that look like? And what does the poverty cycle look like? And how are there other pieces at play more than just money and economics? How do politics fit in? And what does that look like when we start adding health and how do they all kind of interplay with each other? So using KBI, we've looked at things like the United Nations and the Human Development Index, and we've looked at case studies around the world from Myanmar, which is a little dark right now, and kind of looking at these big ideas. But we've also kind of looked at really particular things about individual people and their impacts on the world, and how do we individually as Canadians, maybe on the other side of the world, make a difference. So for example, this year I was at home one night and I was watching W5, and they had a polio in Canada, and they were comparing it to COVID, and I thought, this is amazing. Okay, I can use this. And I went on to KBI, and sure enough, there's a perfect lesson for it. Great. And then as we're doing it with the class gets really, really interested in more kind of like, well, how do vaccines actually work? Okay, so let's link that with the other lesson. Let's learn about that. And so what it ends up being is this really, really robust lesson that otherwise would have been, let's watch a video in class and that's it. And we end up doing much, much more in-depth kind of analysis, but also doing cross-curricular approaches and bringing in the science, and then bring in some ELA with our writing and all these kinds of things. So I feel like because it's already there, it's made, you don't have teachers at home kind of thinking, well, how can I use this? It's done, it's ready for you. And it doesn't matter if tomorrow I get told that I'm going to be doing a remote learning, because it's completely accessible. And so for me, it really becomes like the ultimate teacher's tool, that everything is in place, so that we can dive deeply into topics and we can do it meaningfully. I can trust the content. It's Canadian, it's well edited, it's looked at by the, BC Health. I've got, I know I have nurses who've looked at this, and I know this information about COVID, even though we're still learning about it, it's the best information we have right now. All of those pieces help me really build really good quality lessons, but also really, really adaptive lessons that I can, one night watch a video and suddenly build the next 2 weeks because I have this resource. So for me, it's huge. And when I'm watching my kids in the social studies classroom, and I can only kind of speak to what I see, my kids in my school, they have devices, they have access to tech. So for me, that isn't a roadblock. But for me, the roadblock is just apathy, or, this again. I have been doing this program with my kids the kids who graduated did it when they were in grade 7. So I've been doing it for a while with my kids. I have never had a student kind of not buy into it. And for me, a lot of that comes down to the fact that the lessons are refreshed. There's always new stuff on there. They are tough, so that even if you were able to do some of the lessons like in grade 7, going back into grade 8 is not a given that you'll be able to do them. You have to work for them. But it's also the fact that there is this massive value in the social activism piece. And so there is never a fatigue with it. The connectivity of the site, we use other sites as well where we try to, and they sometimes will kind of crash when we have like 5 kids sign on. But KBI is my golden goose. I every time I go to it, I get some really, really good classroom experiences. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that as a class, the entire class gets excited. And as a class, they're watching the leaderboard, they're getting their updates, they're helping each other out. Over the weekend, all of a sudden someone jumps up, 20 or something like that. But they're also really, really good to kind of look at new lessons and start to make connections. And I've had teachers come up to me and say, yeah, science class today, it turns out they're all like kind of experts now in immunology. I'm like, oh, okay, they remembered it. That's awesome. And so I know that these are actually kind of becoming part of their knowledge base. So all of that is really exciting to see in the social studies classroom, because we are such a bridge course, right? We're kind of trying to build in the articulation, the communication, as well as the written, but we're also trying to build in the analysis and the evaluation. And so oftentimes our content just naturally lends itself to the sciences or even to the maths and so to be able to have this resource there to make those links easier is great. It just enriches my class. I noticed for the teacher resources as well, that when I'm going in, I'm noticing a lot of new ones in there, which is exciting. And sometimes they'll be for middle years, but I'll use them as an introduction for my grade 11s, and they love them. So I have kind of taught myself that the grade level is kind of like a recommendation, but oftentimes they're great quality, and great quality is great quality regardless of the age that they're kind of geared for. So I have a tendency to use a lot of them.